Hey, welcome back to my channel. Appreciate your time. We are doing part 5 with the GPS hardware. So if you've jumped in here, there's actually 4 parts prior to this. But this is part 5, the GPS hardware, wiring it up to the flight controller. So let's get started. Alright, everything's ready for GPS. We're going to go ahead and remove our VTX out of the way. And just going to put the temporary screws to hold the flight controller on. So we're ready to solder that up. And on the GPS to the flight controller, we're going to be using these pads here. Okay? So the GPS unit that we're using is this one here, and screen printed here and also across the pinout on the front. There's a screen printing pinout label. So we'll take a look at that. First, I just wanted to mention that this wire harness is plastic wire, so this isn't silicone wire. Basically going to solder to the flight controller, so I'm not going to be using these plugs here. So if you have a flight controller that would receive the two compass wires, which would be your CL and your DA pad, or your CL and DA plug on your flight controller, and then this would be your 5-volt and your ground, and these two are your RX-TX wires. So if you have these plugs on your flight controller, you can use that harness. I can cut these off and use the harness, but since it's plastic wire, I'm opting to go ahead and just take and get rid of that harness. And I have pre-cut to length that I need a little bundle of silicone wire that I have, and I am going to mount the GPS unit onto this stem here. So this stem here, I'm going to attach this to one of my standoffs, and I'm going to notch the top plate of the frame. So here's the frame. I'm going to notch out the edge of the frame here for this to go into, and then I will use some adhesion and zip ties to keep this in. Now I can't put this on camera for you because this is what it would look like while I solder up the flight controller. So that's not going to work. So I'll go ahead and try to get the best view for you I can. I will solder up this GPS unit that has the compass, and I will solder this up, and then I will solder it to the flight controller, and then I will off camera mount it to that little plate, just to make it easy for you to see what I'm doing. Now there's obviously a different color coding from the wiring I'm going to use. So I've made a little diagram just so you're able to see. So basically we have our little GPS compass unit here, and nicely screen printed on this you have the letter C, the letter V, R, T, G, and D. Okay, I'll give you a close-up look of that. So here's our lettering: C, V, R, T, G, and D. Okay, so on the little diagram I've made here, this is going to represent our flight controller, and then we have our compass GPS unit here with the printed. And then basically what these pins mean is your SCL, your 5-volt in, your RX pad, your TX pad, your ground, and your SDA. And on your flight controller, we're going to wire to the CL pad on the flight controller. The 5-volt, the TX. Now notice that the RX of this unit is going to wire to your TX pad on your flight controller, and your TX pad on your unit is going to wire to your RX pad on your flight controller. And then we're going to wire ground, and we're going to wire our SDA to our DA pad on the flight controller. Okay? And then I've just made a legend for myself so I don't have to fiddle around too much. The wire colors that I'm going to use are represented here in this scale. Okay? Now these are just standard little signal wires. They're made of silicone. And then the only difference that I did is I chose a little bit larger ground, just because of the distance that we're traveling. Want to make sure we get a good solid ground. This little orange wire is going to have no problem pushing 5 volts. But the ground, I like to use a little bit more robust ground. So what I'm going to do is tin up the ends, just one end of these wires. I'll go ahead and tin up all these ends off camera. And then I will tin up, I'll bring you back in, and I'll try to get a good view of these pads, and I will tin these wires up on these pads. Okay? Alright, so we're going to tin these up. First I'm going to take, I'm not sure how old the surface is of these pads, and we really don't care because we're going to put just a little bit of flux on those pads. I don't know if you ever done much plumbing, but you cannot get a good solder bond on copper that has age to it. You have to put some flux on that copper to keep it clean. Not only is it going to etch it and keep it clean, or clean it off, it's going to allow that solder to make a good bond without a bunch of garbage in it. You don't have to get your solder so hot either. Now we're just going to tin up these pads. So make sure your soldering iron nice and clean. And I like to set my soldering iron for little pads like this at about 225. So we have a nice clean tip ready to go. Now our first one is purple. We want to work that way to this way, or at least I'm sitting this way. I'm sitting over this way, over here. Alright, so we want to look at our legend, and we want to start at this end. So our first wire is purple. I'll go ahead and put it in. So these are all soldered up now, and we're just going to follow our legend onto our flight controller. Okay, so we have our purple, which is going to our CL. We have our 5 volt. We have our RX to our TX on blue. And then our white is our TX to our RX. And then our black is our ground. And our pink is our DA going to our DA pad. So let me get that quadcopter in frame here for you. So we have our flight controller in frame now, and here's my bundle of wires that's nice and long to reach up the pole that we need to go up. And basically I'm just going to take these wires and I'm going to twist them up like that, And then every so often, I'm just going to put a little piece of heat shrink tubing on that, just to keep them nice and tightly bundled up. I don't want to heat shrink the whole thing because I want them to be somewhat flexible, so as they move around. But I'm going to take that bundle and twist it up, and then I am going to secure the bottom with the zip tie under the plate. So here's the little plate, which of course I can't put it in the quad because that's what would happen. So I need to do this kind of off to the side. So it's important to remember that this is your antenna, so that needs to reach up to the sky. So I'll adhere this little package to my disc like that, and then I'll twist these wires up, come down to here, and I will put a little heat shrink tube on that. And then I'll twist them and I'll put another heat shrink tube here. Then I'll twist them up and put another heat shrink tube here until the wires are nice and tight and against this mounting pole, basically. Now this little mounting pole did come with its own little, I don't know if you want to call it little, it's ridiculous, but basically I'm not using that. It's huge. The bottom of your little plate goes into that. But I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to use this standoff here. This really doesn't have a ton of weight, and I'm not going to be doing some serious G-force, tricks with this thing. So we'll go ahead and get that all mounted up and cleaned up. And then once I get down to the spot that I want to get down to, then I'll twist the wires up. And then we'll go ahead and solder them into the board. So now I have my bundle here. So that's adhered to the top, ready to go. Kind of just routed them around with just a little bit of, slack, not tight against there. And then I just retain it to this post with just a little bit of heat shrink tubing. And then here's the extra that come off, my slack to go to the flight controller. So we're going to use our DA pad, which is going to be our pink wire. And then we're going to have our 5 volt. So this little pad here will give our 5 volts. This pad will give our ground. And then we have our CL pad and our TX and our RX. So on the Matek board, the RX1 and TX1 pad is set up for the GPS. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get those put in place. Gonna go ahead and tin up our pads on the flight controller. Just a little bit of flux, doesn't take much. Running about 250 degrees, between 225 and 250. Okay, so we got our pad's tinned. Now I've already tinned the ends of my wires. Just clean your soldering iron. That's our white one here. Okay. So now we have our legend here. So we have our purple, orange, blue, white, black, and pink. They're all connected. And of course we can disconnect. Of course we have this off to the side, so we can of course, twist it up a little bit more, if we want to get a tighter bundle. And then we just have a little bit of slack here. So now that's gonna go in there just like that. So we have our VTX coming in here. Okay. So this little bundle of wire up front here is starting to get a little complicated, but I don't like to have any of this type of wiring over here on this side, because the less wires you have over here where your current is, being pushed into your ESC, it's better to have it over here separating your main current lines and your communication lines. And as tight as this package is, this is about as good as I can get it. I could take a little bit of this slack away, but I just like having a little bit of insurance that if I want to, I can lay this off to the side to do some work. So now that's enough slack to get that out of my way. And you're only talking about maybe, 15 millimeters of slack. So I'll go ahead and get this all buttoned up. That's our last step, was the GPS. And I put some heat shrink on the end here, so that if anything were to brush across here, it's not gonna, short those two pads out, because we're not using that, obviously. So this is all ready. One thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run another ground. It doesn't say it in the manual, but I'm basically, before I button this up any further, I'm going to go in here to my battery and I'm going to add another ground to it. And I'm going to bring another ground up from here to this pad. I just want to get a little more ground on that. Right now, this board is grounded only by the ESC wire. So I'm going to go ahead and put a separate ground from here to this pad, just to give it that extra ground insurance. So, but other than that, we're done with hardware. We can put our VTX on, we can plug everything in, we can put our camera in, and we're pretty much finished with hardware. And now it's time to go to iNav and get everything situated and do our calibrations, things like that. So Yep, everything's looking pretty good. The last thing I want to do is, before we even plug it in the iNav, is get everything hooked up, and then we'll go ahead and jump over to our battery lead and do a quick continuity check just to make sure everything is good. We don't have any shorts or any weird things before we go plugging in our flight controller. All right, so that concludes part 5. So the hardware is finished on our 7-inch build here. The next step will be iNav and transmitter setup. So, hey, bear with me on part 6. I don't have a good screen sharing situation right now. I'm trying to figure things out. So, but I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you subscribing. Thanks again for checking out my channel. Have a great day.